Welcome to the Triage Method podcast, Q&A edition with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. How are you, Paddy?
I am absolutely spectacular, young Gary. I know everyone missed me on the last podcast. They
did.
had the nutritional Ziz instead, which,
Jeez.
while he's good, he's just, he's just not quite what the viewers want. You know yourself, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, why would you want that? Why would you want the reincarnation of Ziz, But yeah, anyway.
It's not even the reincarnation. It just is Ziz.
Just is, yeah, full stop. That's it. Ziz never died. Here he is.
He just moved.
But yeah, anyway, moving on to this week's question. It's going to be another nutrition one. We're trying to kind of keep that theme a little bit consistent for these few weeks because, like, one, we were kind of going to do it anyway, but also because I don't want people to be getting real sad when we talk about like resistance training programming, and then they're like, "Oh, but I can't even train," So we'll that for when you're all back in the gym. So this week's question is basically, how do I consume more dietary protein on a lower frequency diet? So not a lower frequency training program, lower frequency diet, meaning that you're eating less meals per day.
And this is just to add to this does also apply to if you are eating lower calories in general.
For sure.
Those two things kind of go hand in hand. Like, yeah, it's all fine and well to be like, yeah, I'm going to have 6 meals per day when you're eating 3,000 to 5,000 calories. But try having 6 meals per day when you're eating 1,200 calories. Like, that's just not that enjoyable. That's like a chicken breast and some spinach. Like that's literally just not an enjoyable way to go about eating. So yeah, even though it is a lower frequency that Gary is saying, that does also apply to a lower calorie approach.
Yeah, and it also just applies to anyone who's kind of struggling to hit their protein in general. And this is something that I think I have struggled with a little bit at times when I've been on maybe a 2 or 3 meal per day structure for whatever reason. I kind of check in with myself every now and then, and I'm like, am I actually hitting enough protein? And maybe I'm coming in just under where I might like to be. Sometimes that does happen. So it is something I have to kind of remind myself of and be a bit more conscious of trying to hit. So
that's because you're basically a vegetarian. That would never happen to me. If I was a free eating human, what would happen is I would end up eating 500 to 600 grams of protein per day because I would just eat meat.
Yeah, I mean, meats are probably my favorite foods, but even if you're consuming like 70 grams of protein per meal, which kind of ends up what I do, it's not quite there just yet in terms of maybe the level that you might want to be at, depending on your goal or whatever. But yeah, of course, the simple solution here is just eat more meat, But in practice,
or plant-based, protein sources, it does become a little bit more difficult.
That'd be pretty rough.
Yeah, there are some practical limitations to that, which I'm sure we will get into, because obviously, like, when you talk about food, it's not just like single macronutrients. Like, even like something like whey protein, like this does still contain some carbohydrates, some fats, so they can add up, especially if you are eating say fattier cuts of meat. That adds up pretty quickly in terms of your fat content. But also, if you are eating more plant-based sources of protein, then that also does add up for your, first of all, probably your fiber, which is probably the most immediate concern, because that can, we'll call it, back you up a little bit. But also it does generally increase your carbohydrate intake as well, potentially quite substantially.
Yeah, and personally, like how I've basically kind of combated this myself is most of the time I try to make sure I've really high protein intake at breakfast, because that just kind of sets you off on the right track. So in general, breakfast will be my highest protein meal. Doesn't mean it has to be for you, but it definitely does set me on the right track, because even in that case, then, like, let's say there does, for whatever reason, you miss a meal, it leaves you with less to catch up on later on, because basically you've taken care of more of it early on in the day. So that's one of the things I typically advise clients. The reason we brought this question up was because one of my clients was going with that kind of 2 meal per day structure because it suited her, and she was struggling to hit her protein intake as a result. So my basic advice to start off with was, let's try and increase protein intake at breakfast. And you have to be kind of somewhat strategic about how you do that. So for example, if you normally eat eggs for breakfast, then me simply saying, okay, eat more eggs, eat 7 eggs instead of 3 eggs. That's not really practical because you're also getting a lot of additional fat and hence a lot of additional calories, which may not be appropriate for someone who's trying to maintain lower calories. So in that case, there are a number of things that you could do. So that we'll just use like having eggs for breakfast as your example. What you could do is add in some extra egg whites. That's particularly useful if you are just having omelets, because you don't really notice that there's additional egg whites in there anyway. So you can just add in a couple of extra egg whites. That bumps up the protein intake. You could add in some cold meats, so for example some ham, some beef, some chicken that you cooked previously or whatever, and that's basically allowing you again to push up the protein intake without like drastically pushing up the calories. So ideally, if you're doing that, you want to choose leaner meats. So rather than having loads of chorizo, opt for something like lean chicken, or something along those lines. Bacon medallions can be useful as well. So that's a nice way of increasing your protein intake without massively changing the overall composition of your breakfast. Another thing you can do, if you have more of a kind of a porridge style breakfast, let's say, is add in some Greek yogurt, the 0% fat Greek yogurt. Some of them have up to 10 grams per 100 grams of protein. Like that's pretty legit. That's pretty significant when you begin to add it up. So it might be the case that you normally have a bowl of porridge with some nuts or nut butter and some fruit or whatever, a bit of yogurt in there, or additional whey protein can fairly significantly bump up protein intake at that meal. So they're the types of things I'd be starting off with, is finding a way that I can increase my protein intake at breakfast. And then obviously you have to think about how many meals you're eating per day. So if you're, let's say, a 75 kilo individual and you're trying to hit 150 grams of protein per day, just very simply, let's say you're trying to hit 2 grams per kilo, then you know that you're going to have to, if you're doing 3 meals per day, you need 50 grams at each of those meals. So what I would do personally in that circumstance is, if I knew I was having problems hitting it, I'd start by aiming for even 60 to 70 grams at breakfast, just because it gives you more freedom later in the day. Because what that means is that if someone cooks a meal for you later, or if you cook a meal that maybe is not inherently a very high protein meal, that you still have that potential to just hit your protein intake because you've taken care of it earlier. Obviously, another alternative is very simply to get to the end of any day and always leave yourself with a little buffer of calories to have a protein shake and just top off your protein intake. So that's a real simple one. But at the same time, some of my clients just don't like drinking protein shakes, and I understand that. Some people don't want to just drink their calories; they'd rather they were actually built into meals. So that is a concern as well. So they'd be some of the things I'd be starting off with. And of course, the obvious one is just eat more protein at each meal, but they're more specific strategies that I think tend to be useful.
Yeah, like they're obviously, like, whenever you discuss diet in the context of, how do you achieve better, we'll call it adherence to certain targets, like you have to remember that that's not like the diet is not one thing. It's not like, oh, when I say diet, we're all eating the exact same foods and we have the exact same hunger response, hunger signals, all of that kind of stuff. Like that's not the case. So what you should take away from this podcast, and well, any discussion on nutrition, is more of the principles, and in this context, if you are, for example, struggling to hit your protein target on we'll call it a lower calorie or a lower meal distribution, then the first thing you need to do is look at where you are currently getting your protein in, and that, for a lot of people, especially if you haven't been tracking, for a long time, or you haven't been eating in a goal-aligned way for a long time, you don't have these very clear, we'll call them rules around nutrition. You're not like, oh, I get my protein by choosing these foods. You may have started tracking and you're effectively still eating the same way you were previously, and you're just controlling for like food volume a little bit more. You haven't really dove in deep to how to realign the foods that you eat to better hit your targets. So that is the first thing you need to do. You need to look at your diet and go, where am I actually currently getting protein from? And when you do this, what quite often becomes apparent is the fact that most people just don't get much protein at all at breakfast, right? So even just from a practical perspective, adding some protein to breakfast is a good idea to help you get to your protein target, rather than what a lot of people do is they'll be tracking their calories, they'll be tracking their macronutrients, and they'll input their breakfast, they'll input their lunch, and between those two meals they maybe got 30 grams of protein, just, we'll call it free living but tracking, right? They're just choosing a normal, they're like, oh yeah, I have my porridge and I don't know, milk for breakfast, and my orange juice or whatever it is that they're eating, and then they have their lunch and they're like, yeah, I got a sandwich out in the local center or shop or whatever, and then it comes to dinner time, to when they're finished work, and they're kind of like, oh wow, I actually have 120 grams of protein to hit my 150 gram target, and obviously if you aren't exactly someone that naturally has a higher preference for high protein foods, then trying to get 120 grams of protein in one meal, that's going to be pretty rough, So the first thing is actually identifying where you are currently getting your protein from, and then looking at how that is distributed throughout the day, and then looking into potentially altering, first of all, your food selection, your food choice at those meals. Like Gary said, you could add in some Greek yogurt, like some of those low-fat Greek yogurts and stuff. They literally are pretty much just protein, which is very easy to get your protein up without having to maybe chug a protein shake or add meat to breakfast and stuff like that. People aren't generally used to. So like adding potentially some foods, or just realigning your food selection. For example, at lunchtime, you might be like, okay, normally I get, I don't know, some sort of sandwich that doesn't have much protein in it. And you go, okay, I'm going to choose something that has a higher protein content. And maybe it is a case that you're like, oh, I'm actually just going to add in a protein bar as well to that. Or you're like, I'm actually just going to, again, have something like yogurt, or have something like some, I don't know, meat or something with that meal. Or probably the ideal is to prepare your meals ahead of time and bring them into work, so that okay, well, I have a chicken breast or 2 chicken breasts for that meal, and that's going to allow me to hit my protein targets much more easily and far more cost effectively, than going out and going, oh well, maybe I'll get a protein bar, which is like €3 a pop, and a sandwich as well, which is probably €3. You end up spending like the guts of €10 every single day on food, when you could have spent 50 cents and prepared it ahead of time, So that's the first thing. You need to look to your diet. Where are you currently getting protein? How is that distributed throughout the day? And then how can you realign your food selection and we'll call it not meal distribution, protein distribution, so that you are at a position, like Gary said, where you've already achieved a good chunk of your protein target by virtue of just eating breakfast, because your breakfast is a high protein breakfast, and then once you've done that, then afterwards it becomes a situation where you've basically covered the main things, just by virtue of making better food selection choices and timing that better, we'll call it. And then you need to look into the very specifics of your situation, and that could be like, all right, I just don't really like having a high protein breakfast. It leaves me feeling, bloated or whatever. Again, like that's unlikely to be the case, as that's just generally not something that people experience. But again, it could be the case for you, where you're like, it just doesn't make me feel right, or my preference is just not aligned with that. Like, I just don't like having to focus on protein at breakfast. I like having my, I don't know, cornflakes or something, that could be very well be the case. So you have to look into your individual preference and individual response to the diet. But once you start getting into that individualization of the diet, it becomes very hard for us to talk about it on a podcast, because that is the case where, these are individual situations that we have to deal with individually. And while there are generally commonalities that you will see when, like, obviously we coach a lot of people and have coached a lot of people, you do see these commonalities come up. That doesn't mean that we have this one size fits all approach to dieting. So you have to then take into account, your exact situation, and then apply best practice to that. Like, for example, you might be able to really control your breakfast and your lunch, but dinner time, maybe you have a family meal, so you're not exactly able to control what is in that, and as a result, your protein intake might be low at that meal. So that means that you have a higher need to either have something that you can eat in the evening that will contribute to protein intake if you need it, or to eat more protein at your breakfast and lunch. So the individual situation has to be taken into account, and you as an individual, or as an individual coaching individuals, are going to have to come up with strategies to help with these issues that come up, so that you can get someone more on track with their goals. But you also have to realize that the diet is never perfect. Well, yeah, it's all cool and fine and well to be able to go, yeah, look, just track your calories, hit these exact numbers, and you'll get results. Like, in theory, that's literally all you need to do. Like, it's not hard. It's, here's your calories, this is work, these are the macronutrients that you need to hit, this will get you towards your goal. Theoretically, everyone should be absolutely shredded out of their mind, because it is that simple, right? But anyone who has tried to adhere to dieting strategies long term, or try to implement dieting strategies, know that it's not that simple in practice, and you have to really understand yourself and understand the basic principles of dieting, and then tailor the approach to you as an individual.
Yeah, and what I think can be quite helpful here in terms of like reviewing your own individual dietary practice, if you're someone who's struggling with protein intake, is to look over your protein sources and analyze them on a protein to calorie ratio. That's just a really helpful, simple way of looking at things, because what you'll find sometimes is that, look, the reason you don't have enough calories left to be able to hit your protein intake is because the protein sources you are choosing have a low protein to calorie ratio. Okay, so you're actually not getting the biggest bang for your buck. A good example of this is people who maybe, in order to get 40 grams of protein, they buy 2 protein bars. And protein bars can be anywhere between 200 to 300 calories per piece. So you're looking at 400 to 600 calories for just 40 grams of protein. Whereas if you were eating, lean chicken breast, you're talking about a very high protein to calorie ratio, where the vast majority of the calories are coming from the protein that is within that food. And hence, for a given amount of calories, you can have more protein there. So when you're thinking about your protein sources, never ever think of it just in terms of grams per 100 gram, because like vegetarians and vegans are desperate for doing this at times, where they will make cross food analyses in terms of like, oh, look, you can get 20 grams of protein from this food. Whereas when you actually look at the amount of calories that you need to consume in order to get that 20 grams of protein, like it's often a lot more versus a lean protein source. And that's
Or
not
even
to say,
from the volume perspective as
yeah,
well. And like eating like whatever for the calories, it's like, all right, that's cool. Maybe you can eat the amount of calories of that food, but eating 10 kilos of fucking broccoli to get your protein needs in, not many people can physically stomach eating that much.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I'm all for people, hitting their protein intake in a plant-based diet. It's definitely very doable. It's a little bit more difficult, of course. But again, regardless of whether or not you're on that type of diet, just look back over your protein sources. Because if you see that, all right, I'm not hitting my protein, but I'm having whole eggs for breakfast. Again, big fan of eggs, criticizing them. But in this context, having whole eggs, then for lunch, let's say you're having meat in your sandwich, but the meat is like salami and pepperoni, or chorizo. Oh, delicious, man. And then this sounds like a great day of eating. And then for lunch, or for dinner rather, you're having a big fatty juicy ribeye. Right, you're having a ribeye. And again, like, you're getting a lot of fat and a lot of calories to go along with that protein. So yes, you've had a delicious day of eating, and on the surface it looks like, yeah, you're eating a high protein diet, whereas when you actually break it down, the amount of calories you're getting relative to the amount of protein from those sources, like, it's not exactly where you might want it if you're someone who is struggling. So in that case, if you were to replace maybe 50% of your eggs with just egg whites, or with additional meat on the side, lean meat, you were to take the salami and pepperoni out of your lunch and replace it with some lean ham and lean turkey, and then dinner you were to opt for, let's say, if you are so lucky, a fillet steak instead of your ribeye for your dinner, or you had a chicken breast or something with the same amount of protein or of calories, then it makes it much easier to actually see how you can get in a higher protein intake overall. So I guess the simple solutions there overall are to, right, audit your diet, see what your protein sources currently are, what's coming along with the protein that you're consuming. Try to get a higher protein breakfast just if possible. And another thing I would say is to, like, don't be afraid to have unconventional snacks. Like, because one of the things that I advise one of my clients who was asking this question was simply, add meat in as a snack during the day. If you've got batch cooked chicken breasts, and you slice them up, you chop them up, and you keep them in the fridge for a couple of days, then they're going to be fine to just kind of pick at for a snack when you're in need of something. So instead of going then and having your fulfill bar, you go and you get 20 grams of protein from your chicken, and it's less calories, probably 50% of the calories, and now you've got a bigger window to get more protein in your actual meal. So they're the main things, I guess, that come to mind for me overall.
Yeah, and also on that snacking on protein suggestion, this is also a really good strategy for people that say they are hungry throughout the day, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, protein is the most satiating, so you're going to feel fuller for longer by eating protein. But also, protein for me, I would literally just eat protein if that was going. I'd go out there, kill a cow, and eat it in a day. Like, I don't like. There's no doubt in my mind, But most people don't find protein to be the most, we'll call it appetizing. Like, they might enjoy protein, but it's not exactly something that they're going, "Ooh, actually, I'd love a nice steak with my tea in the evening." That's not a meme, because that just doesn't happen. So if you are someone that struggles with staying adherent to your diet, choosing something that first of all is very satiating, but second of all can be very low calorie for that satiation, snacking on meat works really effectively. But it also works really effectively because it gets you better in tune with actual hunger signals rather than craving signals, which they are different things, even though a lot of we'll call it the rhetoric around diet kind of aligns those two things and makes it sound like they are interchangeable when they're not. Like, hunger and craving something are not the same thing. Like, going like, "Oh, I'm absolutely starving," and then turning down food, like turning down protein, you're not actually starving. What you are is you're craving a certain macronutrient, usually like hyperpalatable foods. You're craving something like, "Oh, I'd love a Mars bar," or something like that, or "I'd love something really sweet in the evening." You're not actually hungry. So if you, it's not exactly the most pleasing strategy, but it is an effective strategy. Like, I'm not saying that this is what everyone should do. I'm just saying that it is a very effective strategy if you do struggle with snacking, to change all of your snacks to protein snacks. And I don't mean like protein bars. I mean like meat, or if you are plant-based protein sources, like lentils or something. I don't know. And just be like, they're my only snack. That's all I can eat. I don't allow myself to have biscuits as a snack. That's just not the case. I either have, I don't know, high protein yogurt, or I have some meat as a snack. Or if I'm really, pushing the boat out and I want something sweet, I'm choosing a protein shake or something that is like, I don't know, chocolate flavored or something like that. It is a strategy that can be effective for helping realign hunger satiety signals and really elucidating craving signals.
Definitely, I'm on board. So people, no more fucking granola bars and flapjacks. I see you all baking, during this COVID-19. From now on, just make some chicken breasts. Full stop.
And not like a southern fried chicken breast, which again,
I saw you were cooking up some southern fried chicken.
They were tasty. I also put them in like triple batter, which yourself is not exactly
that's health.
The healthiest, or not exactly the most calorie efficient way to get protein, but it is damn tasty. But not as tasty as the sushi that I made as well. That was definitely tastier. And That was definitely not a 2-person portion size, but I did eat all of it.
I've never had sushi, believe it or not.
That's because you don't like fish, because you're a weirdo.
Yeah, I know. I like red meat. I like chicken. I like salmon actually, but yeah,
We did
we'll
have
get there.
salmon. We did have salmon in those because, in fairness, I wasn't cutting raw tuna and being like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing, because I don't. But yeah, next time you're in Dublin, we'll make you some sushi, or we'll bring you for some sushi, whatever.
All right, that'll be probably 2024 when
Yeah,
we're allowed to leave the
roughly
house.
when the country opens back up, I believe the current timeline for restaurants is 2030. That's when they should be allowing people back in. But yeah, it'll be fun.
Fantastic. So, guys, obviously, if you are interested in learning more about Triage, what we're up to, all that sort of stuff, join the Triage newsletter subscription below. Get involved. Join the Triage Method community. Free open access Facebook group. Plenty of productive discussions in there. So get on that. Of course, you can engage with our social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Importantly, YouTube. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube. It helps our videos reach others, and it also reinforces the fact that it's valuable. So if we see that people are liking the videos, sharing the videos and subscribing, we're obviously going to make more that are like that. So do give us that feedback. And obviously our services are ongoing. So if you're interested in getting the ball rolling with one-to-one online coaching, or even just inquiring maybe for when the gyms do reopen, because we actually have had one or two, people ask about that, thinking that, this has given them time to think and they kind of want to get back into a good routine when they do get on the ball. You can inquire and reserve your place if you'd like in terms of the one-to-one online coaching, or you could get involved with the group online coaching. The group online coaching at the moment, we're like all the options that we have for programming are catering for people who are just training at home. So we have basically programming options for if you do have gym equipment or if you don't have gym equipment. So that's something you might want to get involved with if you need a bit of accountability. That's a good call. And if you just want to get some education, get some templates for when you do get back to the gym, we do have our store where we sell the program templates and also the beginner's guidebook, so you can check those out too.
I have nothing else to add, young Gary. That was fantastic.
Unreal. Goodbye, guys. It's too easy.
Enjoy.